Okay. Let us begin. Just wait for people to come in, and we'll see that the volume is working, that everyone can hear me properly and see me properly. A lot of technology that I don't know how to use in here, so we will see. Hello, Tony. You're the first. Welcome. How's the sound for you? 7 HD, Tom. Yeah, so it's a weird one. I came to the office today and I did tell Don, brought my webcam, brought my microphone. I'm very, very happy to set up as normal, just in a quiet space in the office. But he pulled rank and he set up the studio and said, right, you're going to sit here, do this. I'll leave you the keys, lock up after you leave. So kind of reckless from Don, if I'm being honest, because there's a lot of things in here that I don't really know how to use. And if it goes wrong, then goodness knows what we'll do. No, I didn't bring the cats. So my wife is at home with both cats and she's being a hero because she is doing all 4 feedings a day, looking after them, chasing them around the house. And yeah, it's, she's amazing, my wife. Hello from Iran. Hello. How are you doing? It could be louder. All right, let's turn it a little bit up. Is that true for everybody? Okay, let me see what we can do there. I'm just pressing buttons and I don't really know what they do. How's that? You want him to be louder? Okay, all right. When did I hit the road, Ethan? I left on Friday and went to visit my parents. I don't get to see them very often, so I went down there and came up to London, and yeah, back on Thursday. We've got a load of stuff to do this week in the Tifo offices, exciting stuff too. So keep your eyes peeled. That is louder. Okay, thank you, Joe. So just before we get going, I thought it might be fun to have a little bit of a theme tonight because I've been doing a lot of travelling and I haven't watched quite as much football as I usually do. But I thought we might spend a little bit more time on questions, and in particular, like developments that you expect to see in football, because the game's always evolving, always changing. It's always got oh, turn the fader up. I don't know what the fader is, Joe, so I don't really know how to do that. So auto tune. You think I know what auto tune or how to work auto tune? No. Anyway, one of the things I think we'll do is in the questions, let me know what you think will change about the game. So obviously last decade, rise of the fullback, rise of the wing back, or decade before, rise of the 3-man midfield. And just, I've got a theory, kind of half-baked, which I've been developing over the past about 25 minutes, and I'll wheel that out and see what you think. And hit me with yours. I know, Eden, I was completely lost. And I'll try and get to all the comments. Lots of things happening around me, so if I don't respond, don't go all block capitals in the comment section, but just keep asking me and I'll get to it eventually. Let us begin. Let's begin with Jadon Sancho, because feels like it's turned a little bit of a corner. And I don't want to talk about Man United because we'll cover that, I'm sure, in more detail in the podcast tomorrow morning. But I just want to talk about his finish because he was incredibly confident. When you saw him running through on goal, you thought, given the way his United career has started, and given some of the criticism he's received and some of the criticism that United receives as a whole, you thought the easy option there, square the ball, pass the responsibility, and just don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to invite more criticism. Instead, he goes through and has this wonderful little bit of flair, shakes his hips a little bit, puts Mendy changes Mendy's balance. If you watch Mendy's feet and the way his weight is distributed when Sancho runs in, just before he finishes, it's a really clever bit of forward play and loads of composure too. And it's interesting because I think we've all learned over the past few years just how sensitive fans are to things not being exactly as they want. I remember Steven Bergwijn missing a chance at Anfield, hit the inside of the post last year, and he got just dreadful abuse for it. And you just think that's a preposterous overreaction. Like a player hits the inside of the post, he's unlucky. And so you could forgive a lot of players for not deliberately, but subconsciously not wanting to put themselves in harm's way. So if you're Jadon Sancho in that moment, you're running through on goal, you think, right, well, if I don't score, then this is going to be the subject of debate for the next 3 days until something else happens. The next round of fixtures comes out and somebody else does something imperfect. And it just takes, it's almost like it's very, very difficult for us to relate to the way that professional athletes behave. But it must take the most, almost like a superhuman conviction in your own abilities to think, no, I want this moment, whole world's watching, and I want to be in a situation where I can kind of defy all the criticism and just take this chance and do it with a real bit of flair and panache and just a bit of skill. It's full of admiration for it. And it's, yeah, I don't know. I think there's also like, I think if you were to pull the layers back a little bit there, I think there's a commentary on what the game is like now and how emotionally incontinent a lot of people can be. Like when things don't go your way, when your team doesn't win, or when something isn't perfect. And I think that's particularly, the higher you go up in the game, the more true that becomes. Like it's winning isn't enough. You have to win with a clean sheet, or winning but with no hint of an opposition goal at any point. It gets very wearying. And I think players, I don't know how a lot of players survive it. I don't know how they survive downturns in form. And on that, I want to talk about goalkeeping form, not really with reference to any particular player, but it's weird. It's weird because for an outfield player, I suppose if you're going through a bad patch, you're going through a bad month, then you might score a goal, you might provide an assist, might get a really good tackle, get a cheap round of applause off the crowd, or a little bit of praise from a pundit in the studio somewhere, and your morale is lifted and your self-esteem is boosted. For a goalkeeper, it feels like their downturns last a really, really long time, and sometimes they're even terminal. I always think of England goalkeepers. If you look back at sort of the history of England goalkeepers, be it David Seaman or Paul Robinson, Joe Hart, Jordan Pickford's had a few moments like this. Like once there's been a bad moment, typically in a tournament or a high stakes qualifying game, they feel like it becomes very difficult to kind of arrest the movement around you, the kind of perception that you are damaged goods and that you should be replaced immediately and that kind of thing. And I wonder, at club level, I've always wondered what the tonic is for that, because as a goalkeeper, for how long in every game are you really involved? Maybe 5 minutes out of 90, yeah, at best. And you could have like all of the stuff that you do can be absolutely perfect. But if there's one little moment, like a drop cross or a skewed kick or one of those moments which sends like a ripple of anxiety through the crowd, we all know what it's like to be in a stadium when you can feel everybody get nervous and as a result of something a player's done. It feels like a goalkeeper has to go through a sort of almost like a sustained period of perfection to rebuild their confidence, and they can't have that one moment. Good save is important, but it feels like they can't rescue themselves with like individual, I don't know, like just a reaction save, a one-on-one stop, penalty save, because there's always a kind of, the question mark takes a lot longer to disappear. And Joe's doing the moderating, and it's interesting because Joe and I are having a conversation about David De Gea. Oh, Joe is in my WhatsApp. I have not done a thumbnail, Joe, but it would be great if you could do that, please. Joe and I were having a conversation about David De Gea and whether we were going to do an illustrated video on his recovery, and I kind of argued, wrongly as it turns out, that not so sure. He's had a couple of good games, but the period of bad form went on for so long. You think, okay, 5 good games, 10 good games, whatever. It's still not, he's still not back, and it's kind of must be so difficult, and it must be one of the reasons why you get goalkeepers, especially, who they have a peak. And then they kind of slide from relevance, and they're sort of, I can't really think of a better way to describe it than damaged goods. And it's got to be so difficult, and particularly now, particularly at the top of the game. And so I suppose it is a little bit about David De Gea, because he very, very quietly, he's rebuilt his form from being, error-prone doesn't really cover it. Like he had a lot of really bad kind of slapstick moments, probably dating back all the way to probably that Portugal game in the 2018 World Cup, where he let the Ronaldo goal through him, and ever since he seems sort of weakened. He's kind of fallen off his plateau. His his throne is probably one of the best, probably I'd say the best goalkeeper in the world at one point. And very slowly he's had to kind of piece everything back together. And it's going to be very difficult. And I've spoken to a great follower on Twitter, if you don't already, David Priest, who's an ex-professional, now goalkeeping coach. And nobody has a sort of a definitive answer for how you cure like goalkeeping malaise. It's a funny one, and it's kind of the more you think about it and the more you watch and pay attention to goalkeepers and how they're performing at a given moment, the more interesting it becomes. Right, let's have a look at people just saying goodbye to Joe. Everyone just saying goodbye to Joe, so no questions. Let's move on to the second section because that will lead me into, Niles, what do you think of expats that can't even be bothered to learn the language of their new country? It's not good. Like I think it's. I think you should try. I think different people are going to find it harder. And this is something we could talk about now. Actually, when you one of the cliches that gets thrown around when football players move leagues or join new clubs in different countries, there's always that line about, it's difficult to adjust. It's difficult to adjust, and you need time, and adjusting to culture and adapting. And it's interesting because it is difficult. And I moved to Germany about just under 7 months ago. And there's all these little things that you have to learn to do and adapt, and language is one of them. And I think, I know this isn't quite your question, Niles, but I think the important thing is, and this is probably true for footballers too, if you learn the language, you have a much greater chance of feeling involved. And I suppose in a football context, that involves things like being part of like dressing room humour and being able to socialise with players away from training sessions and matches, and getting to know people in your community so it feels like home, because otherwise it can be very alienating. And I think I've grown an appreciation for why some players just never adjust, or why some players, I don't know, struggle is kind of a trite way of putting it, but have difficulties when they move clubs. But yeah, try. Difficult, and it's kind of, I think one of the things is you learn in private, and then you try and use what you've learned out loud to build in public to kind of boost your confidence. But then all it takes is someone speaking really, really, really quickly, especially in a language like German and probably English too. And you can knock your confidence pretty quickly. What is my take on Milan's slowdown? I don't know, but that's a really good segue, because I wanted to talk about Sassuolo. I want to talk about Gianluca Scamacca, because obviously he's got if you haven't seen it, go and look at his goal, because it's kind of like it's his goal. If you go back, he spent last season on loan at Genoa, and he has this habit of, like, when he's 25 yards from goal, opening up his body and finding the top corner. And it's a very weird aesthetic because he's massive. He's Joe Devine tall. He's about 6'4", so he's like a full-on Joe. And he looks he's not thin and wiry like a Peter Crouch. He's actually, he's quite muscular, and he looks he's got a kind of a Dusan Vlahovic physique, and yet he's really good with his feet. And I think his goal scoring, he's not a prolific goal scorer, but there are little touches around the box, little educated finishes and touches and movements, which suggest that in the right team, with the right situation and right players around him, he probably will score a lot of goals. And before we started the live stream, I went on to fbref.com to kind of look up his analytics and sort of some of his deeper stats. And he's really good defensively. So one of the kind of prerequisites for most players who want to play at a high level, but also want to play as a single forward in most systems, you've either got to press, or you, as part of a kind of a deeper block, you've got to be efficient in the tackle. And Scamacca is not a relentless presser. I think he's not average, but he's kind of slightly above average. But he's very, very efficient. So I think he scores very, very highly. He's like in the kind of the 90th percentile for successful tackles. So it means basically anytime a centre-back tries to carry the ball out and past him, he's pretty good at disrupting that. I mean, he's not sort of 100%, but comparatively in relation to other forwards, he's very, very successful. And you think, like, he's 22, he spent most of the time at Sassuolo on loan, This is his first kind of proper season back with his parent club, where he feels like, a permanent member, and he's not sort of in a transient situation. And he should score a lot of goals. And that leads me into my half-baked theory, which is that the target man's coming back. Because, and not just because, like, week to week we tend to talk about a lot of forwards who are, who don't look like David Villa anymore or Leo Messi, like forwards who are just a little bit more traditional in size. And it's interesting to, firstly, to see that success of someone like Haaland and Vlahovic in the future probably, and Scamacca hopefully, but Harry Kane as well. I know Kane isn't really a 9 or a 10, he's somewhere in between, but he's a bigger kind of forward. And I wonder whether, because pressing has been the dominant style of the last few years, and everyone wants to play out from the back, and I wonder whether, because playing out from the back has become quite hazardous, and because it requires a level of technique that either not every club can coach, not every head coach wants to, is able to to teach that style of football, or not every club can afford to buy like cultured centre halves. It's a privilege to be able to say, right, well, I'll spend £50 million and I'll get this guy who can defend like Virgil van Dijk, carry the ball like Van Dijk, and have sort of like the best of both worlds. And I wonder whether over time the reaction to that will be, at most levels, as a kind of this disparity between the very best clubs and everyone else grows larger, grows wider, whether you'll get systems where you want, like, not quite sort of Wimbledon style direct football, but you want a focal point, you want a unit at the top of your formation who isn't just an obelisk to hit, but a player that can bring others into the game. Like, I think Lukaku is an example of this. He's a £90 million forward, so he comes with all the goal scoring and the kind of like the creative game which he's developed over the years, but also the kind of the outlet, the exit ball that you need as a kind of, if you're under the cosh, you're trying to alleviate pressure. And I think someone like Scamacca I don't think he's not going to be an era-defining player. I don't think so. Forgive me, Jen Laker, if you do become one. But I think he's. You could imagine a club outside the Champions League elite saying, I would pay £50 million for him, because you can use him in so many different ways. He's not the kind of forward that has to be, or that will have to be, embedded into a system. Like, he wouldn't be like a Guardiola forward, like a Gabriel Jesus, or someone like that, or an Aguero in a previous generation, like a previous era. He's someone that you can is multi-purpose, and so he's just a lot easier to kind of bend your team around depending on game state, if that makes sense. So that's my I suppose not prediction, because that makes it sound a little bit too serious, but that's my sort of that's my stab at where the next evolution is going to come from. Return of the Targetmen. I can't decide whether I actually believe it will happen or I just want it to, because I kind of miss Targetmen, like sort of big units charging around at the top of the pitch and that kind of thing. And that ages me. When I hear that out loud, it makes me sound like I'm quite old, unfortunately. But that's what I'm getting at. So what do you reckon? Hey, Mr. Hail Caesar, Dzeko is a good example of that. Dzeko is one of those, we talked a couple of weeks ago about how international football is great as a context, because it makes you appreciate players who sometimes at club level don't get the appreciation that they deserve, or don't stand out in their way that they are. But Dzeko does, and always has done. But I think one of the ways in which you measure just what a good player Dzeko is that he's not ageless, but his effect never really dims, because his skill set is so broad, and he's able to adapt to different players, different situations, different tactical systems. And that's a mark of a really good player. Like Olivier Giroud is a good example of that. Like, I think for a long time at Arsenal, he wasn't Thierry Henry, and he obviously wasn't Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, and he was kind of a player during an era where things weren't quite what the fans wanted him to be. So no one really appreciated what a good footballer he was and what a rounded centre forward he was. And I feel like Dzeko's in the same category. Piontek, maybe. Hey, Gavinho, Alexander Isak is super player, but also just so watchable. Like he's also like when he plays small, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. He has an elegance which you don't associate with someone who is, 6'4", Joe Divine Tool. Let's try and coin a phrase there. But Isaac is wonderful player. It's kind of weird that I know there are reasons behind it, but it's a strange thing that it didn't work out for him at Dortmund, and it's particularly unfortunate for Dortmund now, because if Haaland were to leave, then goodness, can you imagine your succession plan? Haaland to Isaac to in the amount of money that would bring in, the opportunities, and yeah, it's a strange one, but he's doing brilliantly for Sociedad. What do we have? Yeah, Salim, good call on Sebastian Haller, because I feel like he's an example of someone that needed the right situations to succeed. Also, that adjusting to different culture thing that we talked about. But when he came to West Ham, he was never West Ham's first choice player that summer. That was an example of a West Ham era where recruitment was still, we have an amount of money and we're going to spend it regardless, and it's going to be on somebody. And he felt like a bit of a victim. Maybe he could have played a little bit better, but I think everyone's saying at Ajax what a good player he is now. What else have we got? Rob, they did have a buyback for Isaac, but I think that's already expired. All hail Lyndon Dykes. Maybe. Isaac would be perfect at Arsenal. Yeah, maybe. I think he would have been perfect for Arsene Wenger's Arsenal, if that makes sense, because he has that habit of, he's a centre forward, but he plays off the left hand side, so he's an out to in kind of player, and that would have suited Wenger's team, I think, pretty much. Gargi asks, Seb, doesn't Liverpool style of... Oh, no, that's disappeared. See, I still haven't put on slow mode, so I'm really, really sorry. Ask that again, put that in, and we will get to it. Seb, do you think Rangnick can implement a successful press with Ronaldo in the United side? Right, bigger topic, Gavino, because we'll deal with the kind of the more granular stuff with JJ tomorrow. But I think Rangnick, it's interesting because it's an idea, and it's for the first time in a while it's Manchester United with a proper plan, not just an attempt to anoint a saviour and hitch their wagons to a personality in the kind of Van Gaal or Mourinho sense. But Rangnick needs space. Rangnick will need trust. This 2-year consultancy that follows the initial interim period is really interesting, because how successful he is depends on what he's allowed to do. Because if you look at, for instance, when he was head coach at Hoffenheim, he referred to the club, and it was in many sense because it was Hoffenheim is when the club was built from a village with, I think, a population of 3,000 people, and Rangnick referred to it as a blank canvas or blank sheet of paper, and that kind of that described both the lack of history, but also what the kind of the room he had to move, and the kind of the opportunity he had to implement his systems and his beliefs and to control things in a way that suits Ralph Rangnick. And I don't know whether that's going to happen at Man United. I don't know that it's not. I just mean that that's a question. So good move, but for it to be successful, you need a lot of other people to accommodate him in the right way. I hope that makes sense. By the way, Joe would shout at me if I didn't plug The Athletic. So go and subscribe to that, theathletic.com/Tifo, because Rafa Honigstein has done loads of really good writing about Ralph Rangnick, not just in light of what's happened last week, but historically. Like, he's a super, super interesting figure, and his place in the game is, I think it's being appreciated now. I don't think it's understated, but you see the kind of the evolution of his career and just the volume of people that are influenced by him. It's amazing. It's amazing. He's very, very interesting guy. So read Rafa's work, because it's great. It deserves to be read by more people. Hey Seb, please can you watch South African soccer, just one match? I would love to hear your impressions of it. Kevin, I don't know where to watch it. We don't really get it, so we don't really get it in Germany, and we don't get much, I don't remember much coverage of it in England, but if I ever do come across it, then absolutely. We will do one more, because I'll be honest, absolutely knackered, and I'm also starving. It's been a very, very long day, and I'm here in the office by myself on a Sunday night, which is, I don't know, not a great way to finish the weekend. What do I think of Xavi's Barca DK? Give it a few weeks, because let's just see. Let's just see. Let's not kind of. I think Jonathan Wilson had a really good line about Xavi. Like, it was in this morning's Guardian. Well, I read it this morning, and he said, "We'll wait to see whether he is someone who," I'm paraphrasing, whether Xavi is someone who just understands Cruyffian football, or whether he's someone who can actually teach it properly. Because there is a difference. And I thought that was a really good line, because it's really tempting, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this. You see Xavi and you see his, you see his pedigree and his upbringing and his Barca DNA, La Masia, etc., and you think, well, this is just going to be easy. But then I think that's to underestimate how special someone like Guardiola was and how special the job he did was all the way back when. And so let's just give it time. Let's be fair to the situation. There's a great piece on Half Spaces with Rene Maric, says Ty. Yes, Rene Maric is very, very interesting. Do read his work. It doesn't contribute as much as he should, or as much as he did, because obviously he's now at Dortmund with Marco Rosa. But what are you getting for a late night snack? Tacticality, I don't know. Let me walk to the tube station, see what's open, and I shall take my chances. One more. So let's give one more minute of looking at questions. Okay, Seb, doesn't Liverpool's style of play predispose them to having most injuries of any Premier League team? I feel the wheels will come off again for them this season. I don't know whether that's... I think it's tempting to believe it because it's so high intensity, and also the injury record doesn't lie. If you look at kind of the difficulties that have been suffered in... Look at the defence. Beyond Van Dijk, Robertson, Alexander-Arnold, Joel Matip has had plenty of issues. It's a difficult one, but I'm not really the right person to answer that. I think it's and also I think this is a problem with the game as a whole. I think we pay more attention to Liverpool because they're a bigger team and their injuries feel more important because they're involved in bigger games, Champions League games, higher volume of games. But I think this is a symptom of surely just the amount of football and the kind of the lack of a rest. Like when do players, like it, particularly some of the South American players, like they go cycle to cycle, tournament to domestic season to continental cups, and there's never really a break. And also, worryingly, it still doesn't seem to be an appetite for creating space in the calendar. And I don't think there's sort of, I wouldn't know if there was, I lack the expertise to judge it, but it's not, I don't think these things are symptoms of individual styles of coaching or conditioning programs. I think it is just players are being run into the ground, and players are having to play way more often, and most importantly, at a very evolved point of the game, like where the intensity of football today is just much greater than ever before, and married with the idea that you've got players playing 50 to 60 games a season, wear and tear and injuries and soft tissue injuries. We did, Alex did a great illustrated video on soft tissue injuries, I think about a year and a half, 2 years ago on the Illustrated channel. Go and look that up, because that's really interesting, and with the knowledge that football's just expanding all the time, it's kind of a scary video, because you think careers are probably going to get a little bit shorter, and players' prime's going to occur a little bit earlier, and it's a worrying situation. Okay, so I think we'll call it a day. I am absolutely starving. Also need some sleep. So thank you so much for joining us. And hey, nothing went wrong. Like I can tell Don on the way out of the office that everything is fine. I didn't set fire to anything. Nothing fell down. Everything recorded properly. I hope the sound was good. And I hope everybody enjoy the rest of your weekend, what's left of it. Stay safe, obviously, people in the UK and in Europe, because the situation's getting a little bit rubbish out there. And see you tomorrow. It's JJ and I on the podcast, and that'll be out on Tuesday morning. And yeah, hope you look forward to that. I'll be back in Germany, hopefully back in Germany this time next week. So we'll do this from my attic rather than the studio. Thanks for joining us.